So we are live now. Thank you again, everyone, for joining. Just to give you a brief intro, for those of you who don't know Vacuumlabs, we're a fintech company focused on providing engineers, designers, product designers, DevOps, everything you really need to build up and maintain a fintech in the current world. We've been around for about 10 years and we operate all across the world. Most of our offices are with people in them, because that's what offices are, they have people, don't they? Most of them are located in Europe, although we've delivered projects across the world, as you can see here on the slide. And we've worked with many different companies of many different sizes across the board. So whether that be traditional banks, smaller fintechs, or everything in between, both in the payment space, the what's in here, crypto, of course, and digital banking in general. So, but let's move on to actually our experiences and what we've survived and not survived as a company. So again, today's panelists are Kristina Shvetsova, who's a project lead, Juraj Machach, a tech lead, and Rudolf Vido, a product lead. So maybe I'll give them a couple of seconds to maybe do a quick intro, and I can start with Kika.
So hi everyone, I am the project lead here. I started as a business analyst and gradually shifted to project and program management roles. I have background in consulting, which thanks to which I was lucky to see quite a great variety of different clients and different problems that they were facing. And probably one of my most recent projects was a greenfield digital bank built in Asia. So yeah, that's about me.
Thank you, Kika. Juraj?
Hi everyone, I'm Juraj. I'm working as a tech lead in Vacuumlabs. I've been with Vacuumlabs actually for probably 9 years now, so quite a time. During that time, I've seen a couple of projects here. Many of them were actually fintechs, and the last project I worked on was one with Kristina. That's the same project in Asia.
Yep. Hi everyone, my name is Rudo. I'm head of product and design department at Vacuumlabs. My background is also in consulting, both external and internal, and I have been working with both of these guys on building a new digital bank, and I'm also spending quite a number of time doing product discoveries for banks and scale-ups to come up with new products and product strategies.
Well, thank you to all of you. I'm sure we'll hear a lot more from you in the next 45 minutes to an hour. Let's see how fast or slow we can make it. So let's move on to our first topic, which might sound actually kind of counterintuitive, and that's because it is. Usually you don't hear this version of the quote, which is saving money to lose money. So, Kika, why would a client want to save money to lose money? Or would they?
Well, I don't think they do it intentionally because, as you said, it's counterintuitive, doesn't make sense. It's basically an oxymoron. So here's one example that we've quite recently experienced. It was a universal bank operating in business for quite some years, and they were replacing a payment processor. It was a very logical move from their end because the current one that they have, it was built on old tech stack, causing quite a lot of performance issues that were tackling actually the clients. When they needed some modifications, it took forever and that was costly. So as I said, very logical move from their end. Their business owners were quite senior, well-versed in their field of expertise. So they thought they grasped what the current system offers perfectly, and they focused really on what they expect, the new things from the system. So they've talked to numerous vendors, really focusing on the future features that they would like to develop with this new system. And they thought they could also like cut corners a bit in the planning process because as said, they thought that they know their stuff. So after a brief RFP, they've chosen their vendor, and that's basically when the problem started, because the very first part was to actually get the features that they already had transformed or migrated to the new solutions, and they started to find out gaps. Of course, they anticipated for those gaps, but they never anticipated so many of them, and to such a big extent that they found out in the end. So what they ended up with was that instead of spending a little more time preparing for that project, really documenting what they need, they had to invest potentially a lot more money to overcome those gaps that they found out. Just an example, I know the Apple Pay and Google Pay features. Today, everybody thinks implicitly that's something of the basic features that the payment processor should be covering and supporting. This one, the one they chose, was not. So yet another gap that they didn't account for at the beginning. So to sum up, this story perfectly illustrates this nonsense that saving money at the beginning can lead to spending a lot of money later on. So.
Thank you, Kika. I mean, really, this is we usually hear of companies trying to prepare for a big project, spending a lot of money, but really what they're doing is, if the eventual spend on the development will be so large, really, if you are not preparing for it properly and spending an appropriate amount of money in the beginning, you're going to have issues, right?
Exactly. And one thing to consider here is also the size of the project. I mean, if it's a big one, that's, I don't know, one of the biggest in some years, you should also think about it's something extraordinary. So it's not something that you do repetitively, where you can cut corners in the planning phase. Think about proportionally spending the money in the beginning in order to ensure more smooth build phase.
Exactly. And as it will be for every topic, Kika has prepared a slide which you can take away and then read through afterwards about sort of some of the key lessons learned, and then some of the like really practical questions you can ask yourself when either working with a client or you yourself being the client. I'll just run through the lessons learned, and then you can sort of run through the questions after the session once you have time. So lessons learned: spend money in the beginning to save it later. Understand your features from the process perspective, get help from unbiased experts, and request a reference visit when choosing a software vendor.
Yes.
Guys, on this side of the table, do you guys have anything else to add to this sort of saving money to lose money?
Yeah, I would like to add to the point of looking at features in like a process view. That means that you can spend quite a lot of money, but if you don't spend them well, then this could be also wasted effort. And what we have seen in past is that the clients would just, dot down bullet points of what are the features that they expect, but they didn't try to think through like, okay, how the customer would actually go through and consume and use those features. Because a lot of times devil is in the detail, and only by going through the process view of the feature, you can find out the problems, like how the customer will sign the documents. We didn't think about that. Do we have a solution for that? And these are the, black boxes or spaces, the unknown unknowns that you don't even know you have there, but they will bite you later. And it's better to be in this, granularity sooner, so you don't have problems later. So look at your features in motion earlier.
Absolutely. And, we're going to hear more from
the commercials.
The commercials. Change. Sometimes. All right. A second topic that we have here is outsourcing innovation. A lot of times when when we work with clients or we've been in conversations when they're talking with their end customers, the companies we work with, or the people working in those companies, often get almost like the job of having the job of passing on the job of innovation off to the clients, right? So, do you have an example of where that sort of outsourcing of innovation caused a bit of a problem, and then how you realign that?
Yeah, exactly. So there was a situation, relatively large bank in CE region. They were trying to come up with a new innovative product, basically revamp their bank packages. And their idea was that they would just talk to customers and find out what the customers want. And how they approach the interviews with customers is that they ask them like, okay, dear customer, what are the features you would like to get in your bank package? What is the maximum amount of money you are willing to pay? And basically they were writing down all these ideas and what the customer said. And then kind of they didn't focus that much on pains and problems, but they just posted down what the customer said and took it as almost requirements or specs for the new product. So it was like, okay, customers are willing to pay up to €5 for package. They would like to have, I don't know, tokenized card, and they would like to have 5 free transfers or something like that. And that's how they wanted to approach creation of new product. And when we came to this project, what was the first thing we did was that we tried to persuade the customer, our clients, not the customer, to talk to customers in a different manner, because customers are notoriously bad at telling you or predicting their future behavior, or even telling you like how they made decisions in the past, because decisions are messy. You know, there are multiple things that you cannot like point it to this like one deciding factor. They are messy things. So what you should do instead is that you should try to find empathy for a customer, try to basically walk in their shoes and just get them talking. That means ask them to tell you about a story, like tell me about the last time you used our product, like you know, what was happening, how you were feeling, what happened, or last time you were frustrated with our product, or last time you had problems, you wanted to do something in the application but you failed, or you didn't know where to navigate. And basically this is how you get the customer speaking, and where you can really empathize with them and come up with the pain points and the things which are not working. And then it should be your job to innovate based on those pain points and having deep understanding for the customer. So, you know, don't outsource the innovation to the customer, but try to find their pain points and their point of view, and then innovate on top of that. So do brainstormings, prioritize the different features and different solutions to the problems, and don't box yourself in this small box of what customers told us, because you know, customers are not the innovators of your product.
Okay, so what you're definitely not saying is don't talk to your customers.
Of course not.
Right. You should definitely talk to them, but it's about sort of the nuance of the conversation. It's about going deeper into the lives of those people and how they're going to be using that product or service. And
also maybe spending more time on the problems and not the solutions, because a lot of times, you know, but it's natural that we people are like, we are born or taught in schools to be problem solvers, like okay, so solution, but really a magic can happen if you spend enough time in the problem space as well. And I think that's where the phase which companies are quite often jumping, that they jump from problem to solution, and they don't look at, okay, what are all the different solutions we could solve these problems with, or what are actually the problems we are solving. So they just end up with maybe suboptimal solution, and once you build it, it's already too late to change it or too costly, right?
Absolutely. Thank you, Rudo. Well, some of the key lessons learned from this really are: don't expect your customers to provide you with the ideas for new features. They might provide the initial inspiration or some of their life situations, but they're not directly there. Focus on understanding their pain points and frustrations as basis for innovation. And don't skip brainstorming after you've conducted customer interviews. So it's not just about having the customer interview. but also about the brainstorming afterwards.
Mhm.
Anybody else would like to add anything to this?
Well, I found it quite interesting when you talked about asking the customers about price schemas or fees in general, because as a project manager, it's quite often that projects need to be somehow, they are underpinned by some financial objectives. There's some business case behind them. And this could completely jeopardize it. I mean, you calculate with something, and then obviously the customers are going to be answering that they want to pay nothing or very little. And then the project itself might not have economic justification in the end. So if you follow that pattern that you just mentioned, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, pricing is a whole topic that
Yes.
can really fail in many different scenarios.
Yeah.
But it's not one of the ones we put down, but definitely something to
No,
think
I
about.
mean, I'm not questioning the testing of with the customers, the sensitivity to price, but definitely not asking them like, tell us
Tell us the price.
tell us.
I
the
want it
price.
for free, of course.
But there are definitely different techniques where you can
Yeah.
test the price sensitivity,
Mhm.
like creating a fake product or
Yeah.
different ways of
So, I really like the title of this one. Usually we say the devil is in the details, but Uri approached me and said, well, I think the devil is the detail. We're just talking about, knowing the details of your vendor selection, knowing the details of what your customers not want or not want, and then acting on it. So why is the detail the devil? And I think more specifically, since you're on the tech side, why is the devil the detail in tech?
Okay, so yeah, can too much detail hurt? Well, we'll see. So I have this story that we have joined. I have joined the project. It was a fintech project where they had already user stories defined, and we were defining user stories as we went through the project as well. And when you looked at the story, it looked in very good shape, right? Because it had a lot of detail there. It was a lot of text. It had a lot of specification down to the technical detail of which field in the database should be used for storing that data and that data. What kind of API endpoints should be exposed? What is the shape of the API that should be provided in order to accept it, in order to provide this to the customers, right? So yeah, sure. Obviously, they must have thought it all through, and obviously it must be easy to implement now, right? Well, it turns out quite the opposite, because having so much technical detail there from the product specification by the product people caused endless discussions between the tech and the product, between like, okay, I need to change this API, but because it doesn't really fit together in what we have already in the tech. It doesn't fit together to fulfill the actual requirements for the product. So we need to change that. Can we change that? And the things then turns out that the technical detail wasn't really an actual constraint. It was an artificial constraint. It was there to kind of help, but it didn't really help in the end. What would have helped is what the story was lacking, and that was all the different perspectives of how the product should behave for the users. What are really the requirements from the product perspective? What do you want to have? Not really how you want to implement it in your technical system. That is something that the tech people would solve, right? So what the stories were missing are the different perspectives of different users, different paths, I would call it, right? The happy paths and the fail paths. Like, what happens if it doesn't work, if that doesn't work? What should happen then? But instead, it contained basically a happy path down to a technical detail, which wasn't really important. And it was just artificially constraining the tech developers to do something that wasn't even required, right? So this sparked discussions and slowed down the development in the end. When we figured out, then we shaped the new stories such that the acceptance criteria and the story itself was written in a way that the requester of that story was actually able to verify and was actually able to accept that, right? So you're not going to go into the logs in the database and look if the field really matches. No one cares really on the product side, right? So you're going to test all the flows. Then if the flows satisfy what you what you would like to have there. And from then on, it worked much better because actually they could accept the stories in UAT.
Right. I mean, and I really, when we were discussing preparing for the webinar, I think one of the analogies we came up with was almost like if you hired an artist to paint you something,
Yes.
and instead of telling them how you want to feel from the painting and what you want to have on the painting, and what's the purpose of it? Is it going to be in the lobby? Is it going to be in the living room? You tell them, you know, exactly the types of brushes, you know, that's what.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a very good metaphor, actually. They're like, I want yellow line, it has to be yellow line, and I want to feel like this, but it has to be drawn in yellow, and you just want to use red because it fits the painting. It doesn't really fit the feelings, right? So, yeah, very good metaphor. I like that.
So to maybe give it a bit of a summary, it really try to ensure that the product requests capture only what the product wants. I mean, I guess this really comes down to the nature of what the user story is meant to be. You know, I as somebody want to do something so that I can achieve something.
Yeah.
So it's a very product-driven definition, and then obviously the technical parts can come afterwards. And then artificial technical constraints from product spec create more questions than answers. Right?
Yes.
Kika, you know, as a project manager, do you encounter this, like when projects are being delivered, this sort of issue where the tech is overspecified by the product specification?
Yeah, and I've seen it, and usually, at least from my experience, it's the case of a bigger, more corporate-like organizations where they have like set processes for software development and delivery, and they do tend to have like a prescribed way of detailed technical specification. They have people dedicated just to do that, to hear out the business stories and then translate them. So they serve basically as an intermediaries there. And yes, what the results very often are that things get lost in translation. The coder doesn't actually get the bigger perspective, just as Juraj was saying. And from the product management perspective, it's costly because you've got to pay. You have one more person on the payroll for the project. So
yeah, so I guess that's maybe one additional lesson learned. Like
yeah.
if you sort of eliminate the barriers between the people thinking about the product and the people implementing them. Oh, this is sitting right next to each other.
Yeah. Anything can
Yeah, just look around the side of the table. So yeah, I think that's really important because the devil comes up in that detail, and it really muddles up the waters.
Focus on hiring good engineers who are able to come up and think through the technical details and don't need the prescription.
Exactly, and this is a plug for Vacuumlabs. If you're looking for engineers just like you're right here. So thank you, Kika, for that. That was. We didn't even plan that.
No.
We missed the one we planned earlier. One of those fails. So another one, and this one goes back to Kika. The sinking ship fallacy. Yeah. Sometimes we think we're on a Titanic, but we're not really sure we are.
Yeah.
Tell us about the sinking ship fallacy. I know you're very excited to tell us.
Yes, first of all, I must tell you why I chose this, because I'm a sailor, so that's why the sailing topic.
No,
but, okay, but back to project management. So the story, it's funny because it was two clients actually in quite close to each other last year. They approached us with a quite common and simple request. We need developers of this and this tech stack, and we need them ASAP because we are already in delay with our projects. The clients and the respective projects varied quite a lot, but basically the ask was the same, identical. So we jumped on calls with them to understand what they are actually trying to build in order to match them with the most fitting talent. So, and during those calls, while asking them, what are you actually doing? We began to uncover some major issues that were not connecting with or not directly connected with the missing or lack of capacity, but by process and setup problems in general of those projects. So And we discovered quite wide range of issues that we thought were the actual cause. Why are they lagging behind? So in one case, they didn't have any clear responsibility definition. Like, okay, you can be very corporate and have a racing metric defined, or you can simply have somewhere written like your team responsible for this and that, and this is expectations of the outcomes of your work. Then we've seen bad or inappropriate team structures. So we've seen squads where there were 20 plus people, and they were trying to do the regular agile ceremonies. It was dysfunctional. Too many people stand up, which is supposed to last, up around 15 minutes. Impossible with 20 people on the call. So then I don't know, alignment meetings with 30 people on them. So how can you align tactically on your really like day-to-day basis with 30 people on the call? That was one of the reasons that it wasn't working, and then they weren't progressing. In the product space, a lot of those issues also appeared, like no clear definitions for the product process, no need to have stages like, okay, this is when the feature is done. These are the criteria when it's done, when it's ready to be picked up by the developers. So
so far it sounds like a sinking ship.
Both of the clients, I mean, both of the customers, they were really hardworking people who just reach out for the most straightforward solution. It's not going well. Let's add more people because we lack the capacity. And since they were so under the water with the projects themselves, they didn't find the time or the capacity to actually think about why are we struggling, why it's not working. So, and we ended up actually in one case, giving them some resources, and one of them helping them with some sort of health check and reset up. So the learning point here is to, when you know that you have a problem, don't automatically reach out to just throw more people in, but think about where the issue actually is, what's causing the actual problems, why are we lagging behind, and maybe the solution is just reset up and come up with some setup measures, not the capacity measures.
Yeah, so keeping the same analogy, if you have a sinking ship, and assuming it is actually sort of sinking, it's sort of going down, by adding more people onto it, it's probably not going to stay afloat.
Yeah, it's probably going to sink in the ship.
It's gonna sink even if it wasn't due to sink. Right?
Yes,
Right.
yes,
So,
yes.
Cool. So some of the sort of key lessons learned here really are: understand the cause of unsatisfactory progress on your project before you try to fix it. So it's not just about, let's throw bodies at it or let's throw more people at it. Involve unbiased people to assess the situation. Yes. So really try to bring in somebody like Vacuumlabs to come have a look at really what you're doing and give you an unbiased opinion. Obviously, there's many different parts to every single project. So if you're looking into a more technical side, you might need more technical. But if you're looking more into the why aren't the financials working here? Maybe somebody else might be right. But really it's about finding the most unbiased people to help, and talk to your team regularly to do retrospectives and follow up on results. So really those retrospectives are really, really key and important. Kika was talking a lot about the ships. Do you want to add something else?
No, I just want to stress out the retrospective part, because that's what we find out with most of the clients, that they didn't really ask the team, like, why do you think you are not managing, you are not fulfilling the goals that we set up? Why do you lagging behind your plans? And it was always the top people doing the decisions, and they didn't ask the people in the field what was the struggles that they are facing. So
it's never pleasant to do retrospective, right?
Yes,
it's uncomfortable for everyone, but in the end you come out as a stronger team, and you maybe talk about things that are just brewing under the leaf.
Exactly.
Being communicated.
I guess the lesson learned as you're talking about this is really giving the people the feeling of safety that they can go into that retro fully open.
Yeah.
Because if you do, then those people might come up with uncomfortable things, but those uncomfortable things can be actually the things that are pulling the ship down without you actually knowing.
Yeah, even from the perspective of the members in the team, like if you just keep on adding people, but you don't really have a direction, if there's some other problem, it's just not just the capacity, then you just have more overheads and synchronization. And if you have people that really have ownership and want to deliver, then they will be stagnating because you just added more people that didn't fix the real problem which is behind, right? So what you get is frustrated people who would otherwise be very good in delivery, right? So you need to fix the problem, the real problem, not just adding more capacity, like Christina said.
Beautiful. Well, I guess we have agreement.
Yeah.
Again, thank you everyone for asking. We now have 4 questions that have come in. We'll be answering them in the Q&A section, which will be after this this point we have here. Again, feel free to add any questions if anything comes up. Number 5. Perfect is the enemy of done. This one is a little bit more cliche than the devil is the detail. You're right, but okay, so why is perfect the enemy of done, and how has trying to be perfect not helped you?
I know it's a cliche, but it's kind of my life story. Okay, so we were
bringing the therapist now.
It's scheduled for another hour. Okay, so we were like, just one example, like I said, there are many of them, but we were working on a rather big fintech project. It was actually bank, but anyway, built microservices architecture. So you had the distributed system, and you want to, and this is as it's an important piece of a product, you want to make sure it actually works, right? So you want to test everything. You want to have it automated so that you can test regressions, and you want to have perfect assurance that everything works as it should be working. And it has its challenges, right? So you have this big distributed systems with a lot of teams. You have deployments every other hour, and the state, you have a limited number of environments. You have a limited number of resources. You just cannot spawn an environment around the service every time you want to test it. It's just not feasible, and it's costly anyway. So you operate with this in mind, and you have to find some best testing strategy to do integration testing, to do end-to-end testing, automated, to completely ensure that your product isn't faulty anywhere. It doesn't have regressions every time you make change, and you're making changes every day, every other hour. I mean, we had deployments, like many of them per day, right? So how do you do this? Now, we were discussing the perfect strategy for days, weeks, in even longer than I would care to admit. Then when we found out that, okay, now what do we really have here? The development was progressing anyway. We were trying to find out the strategy, but the development needed to move, right? So they had to come up with something, but it wasn't really synchronized across the teams in any way. They just tested for the basic use cases, and they would really use some strategy that wouldn't be perfect, but it would be just good enough for the main use cases that they would have, right? So then we sat down for a day, thought about, okay, let's do just some basic contract testing. Let's do contract testing between the components and so on. I won't bother you with the technical details anyway, but it was good enough for the main use cases that you wanted to test. It worked quite okay. It covered 80% of all of the use cases. We didn't really cater for the edge cases in the automated fashion, but you can still fill up the gaps with some manual testing in the end-to-end. You can still fill up the gaps with some very few end-to-end test cases which were automated, but they were, you wouldn't really care about the change of state in the services and so on, because you would because for the few test cases, you would just make sure that they are they're done in a specific way that it doesn't affect the whole system, right? So in the end, the moral of the story is like the title, having 80% of something is better than 100% of nothing, right? So the development wanted to have would be much better off with having just at least some testing strategy for the main use cases they would go with, rather than having something perfect that was basically unachievable and that we would just spend time on it.
I guess somebody listening might now be thinking, so did you just do this simple strategy until you launched and then I just kept it, or did you improve it through time?
No. So you know, it's basically very similar to what you do with Agile, right? So you don't just build a perfect product out of nowhere. You start with an MVP with the testing strategy. Like, what do I need to cover the main use case they have? Then I find out what are the gaps, and I try to fill the gaps by iterating on the testing strategy. So of course we ended up somehow perfecting it in the end, right? So we ended up enhancing the strategy, but we started with something that was imperfect, that was just good enough, and we iterated on that to make it better and better. But just by filling the gaps, finding out where are the issues, and trying to solve the actual issues that are there.
Makes a lot of sense.
Perfect.
So perfect. Oh, it wasn't perfect, but perfect is the enemy of done, and you completed the session. So, in the word of trade-offs, there is no perfect solution. Focus on solving what really matters. Resolve the details later, and not as in later 5 years after it goes in production, but later and appropriate.
I mean, iterate on that, yeah.
Yes, of course. And the third one, iterate on a sufficient solution to make it better rather than waiting to get something perfect first. Kika or Rudo, anything, when I say the word perfect, anything come up? Other than childhood trauma?
Nice one. People in this room.
Yeah, I can completely relate with you, right? Also, you know, on the product side, when you are trying to document the product, there is so many more details where you can go into, like where do you stop with unhappy parts, how do you document all of them, and this could also kind of get you stuck in not moving forward because you are just paralyzed by all the variants of user stories, and you are not sure on which level of detail you start documenting it. And that's why it's important to have some template, some example, you know, like this is the level of detail we get into at this point in time. You align with tech leads that they are okay with that. You make sure that all the product people somehow work in the same fashion, same level of detail. And in the end, this really helps you to move forward. And if then during the testing, you find out that you didn't catch some unhappy parts, you can fix them later, but at least you are not being stopped by not having everything super documented. That's why it's important to have good and reasonable definition of ready for the user stories and designs that go into development process. So the developers are not stopped by not having enough details, but also that you are not stopping them by spending too much time with documenting the details and not moving forward.
Yeah, I think you already mentioned the idea of black boxes. This is something we've seen on multiple projects where we suddenly realize that there are obvious black boxes, as we call them, like parts of the application, parts of the process, parts of the flows, where it's not that we haven't documented them perfectly in all the detail with all the technical specification, but it's rather the fact that we don't really know more than a sentence or a word, and that really becomes an issue. And instead of waiting to have a perfect definition of it, we at least have that conversation. Finally, the questions. So the first question comes from Christelle. What challenges do fintech startups, the question is for startups, usually face? Anybody want to kick off that question?
One of the ones I experience quite often is the prioritization. So they are quite, it's quite challenging for them to prioritize the features because they have the expectations that they have to compete with established players, and they have to beat them with just the wealth of features. But you know, this can lead you into having the project to the builds to be too expensive, and then also having the features just in a way that you just tick boxes that you have the feature, but the feature is actually not well thought through. You didn't think of all the different ways how the customers might want to interact with it. So I would say one of the big problems is the prioritization, ruthless prioritization. I would say that's where the startups can really be made or broken.
And when you choose the one or the set of the key features that's supposed to be the breakthrough, you should really spend the time and think them through just through those sets. So they are perfect. They are well thought through, perfect in the sense of not like huge or expensive, but you have a very good idea of what they're supposed to bring to the customers.
And they solve some real pain points.
Yes.
Right?
I have a different, I mean, a different,
You disagree.
no, different viewpoint, like maybe from, I've seen enthusiastic CTOs starting the project with niche technology that they just liked, but there was no justification for that, right? So they ended up with having a project with niche technology and difficulty to find any programmers for that, right? After they found those 10, exact 10 that should work with that.
Or the technology wasn't mature enough.
Yeah, well, that's the other part, because only a couple of people can code in that, so sure.
So really, I think what you were saying is sort of the hygiene factor. Like we've heard that on multiple projects. They're like, oh, we need to have the basic hygiene that every single already established bank has, and we need to repeat that and add on top of it. What you're saying is actually reduce a lot of it and just keep the important parts. And what you added to that from a technical perspective is maybe try trusting some of the slightly more established technologies as opposed to, and I'm not saying, do the whole thing in COBOL, although that could be fun. You can have GPT-4 write it. In fact, we just tried it with a colleague. You could actually rewrite COBOL into Python and then back. And so it's actually very fun. It's very fun.
Did you code review that?
I didn't, but we were doing a very simple loop, so I think it will be fine. Anyway, well, thank you, Crystal, for the question. I hope we answered it, and if you have any follow-up, either ask here or send us a message after this. So another question from Vladimir. Fintech innovations involve handling sensitive data. What are some of the top security and privacy considerations to prioritize to avoid failures?
Okay.
I think this is your question.
Yeah. So you would be surprised. Sometimes it's not just as you would expect, but anyway, so usually you have to make sure that just your personally identifiable information like PIIs are not exposed anywhere, not even to programmers, not even to whoever shouldn't have access to that. Some L1 people should have probably access to that. And then you do that by, usually practice should be now by tokenizing the specific fields that you save to your data lake, data warehouse, and anywhere. So you move it through your tokenization service, and then you can be sure that whoever is looking in the data lake, like which can be your programmers, we're trying to just debug things, or just looking at tokenized data, and you're not exposing any of the customer identifiable information. But this can be a topic for a couple of hours, because then you have like it's called K identifiable information, like how many pieces of information together can be an identification of a person. So how do you find that? That's a very interesting topic. But the answer is that you are better safe than sorry. So you tokenize more than you should, then then you just expose the IDs. I'm not sure if that answers the question. If not, like, feel free to follow up. And
I think there's also details. So if you're struggling with something, if you're thinking about a particular approach, we've seen sort of smaller projects which have fairly limited data, limited private information, where the security might be different. There may be a different security approach than if you're working with a massive bank with hundreds of thousands of accounts or more, where the considerations are very different. And I think from a more sort of project management perspective, I think one thing to also consider is regulatory implications. Do you want to talk a bit about that, Kika, or?
Again, it's a topic of its own. So yeah, definitely you need to adhere to the local implications from the regulation, and also depending what kind of business you are. So whether you're a licensed business or you're just building, I don't know, a app for, I don't know, gym or something. So
I think what is really important consideration when you're building in a regulated space, and you need to get a stamp of approval from regulator, is maybe to consider, don't you need to first build some regulatory build that you need to show to regulator and optimize towards that, and then kind of build for your customers, because that could be really stopping you from getting to market. So get that stamp of approval with regulatory build, and then satisfy the customers with additional build. That could be also a way how to think about it when planning.
Again, we can, with one of our partner companies, Sparring, we can also sort of help you out with some of the legal implications. Although we're not specifically, banking regulators specific, but we can sort of help you out in both, or direct you to the right people. So if you have any follow-up questions, shoot them our way. Thank you, Vladimir, for this question. And now I'm moving on to the next question from David. In light of recent high-tech fintech scandals, there were multiple, or one every year, how can fintechs enhance transparency and regain trust?
that's a good one.
Okay.
All right, so maybe I'll react to this one. I think when we usually see a scandal, whether that be the sort of FTX scandal of late last year, beginning of this year, or when we hear about Wirecard a couple of years ago, 2 years, 3 years, I don't remember. A lot of the time, there's actually sort of criminal activity happening underneath. So it has nothing to do with the many lovely people. Actually, SVB was another example, Silicon Valley Bank. So there was potentially criminal activity. Again, in all of these, there was potentially criminal activity. And that's what really brought it down. Maybe not the actual criminal activity, but the perception of criminal activity, just to be clear. Yeah. So maybe one of the things that you can focus on if you're building a fintech is really both internally and externally communicate clearly and be as honest as possible. So if things aren't working out, or if, for example, you discover a security issue, fix it, solve it, let your customers know this happened, because it's part of the just being literally transparent. Because you say, how do you enhance the transparency? Well, you become more transparent, and that actually builds trust in many people. You're actually more likely to trust somebody who was transparent with you, even with bad news, than the other way. Not for everyone, not perfect, but again, try to look at scandals and see is there something there that where I can tell either internally my employees or my customers more information about what we're doing, so that they keep the trust that they already have. Yeah. If you're participating in criminal activity, so that's probably a good idea to stop. Yes. But I don't think I should be, or the people in this room should be to tell you that.
It's simple, like don't do fraud. Sorry, just want to say, banks, like all organizations, also have their risk appetite, and it's not just like credit risk appetite, but it's also risk of the features. Like what do you launch? When do you launch it? You want to be first in the market when you go with a tech debt there, right? So you risk some of the things, like maybe we'll launch this half done, and we will fingers crossed nothing bad will happen, right? But then this is sometimes the risk will fall into the 5% of the risk, and things just go wrong.
But with the cases probably that David was mentioning, that seemed to be like a intentional bad doing, malpractice, where here when you rush something, you want to get out something, but you honestly, truly, genuinely trying, you do your best, it's, then it's just
you remove all AML rules just to make it smoother KYC.
Okay, but that's then intentional, and you're cutting the regulations in the wrong place.
Yeah. But the thing is, like, if you as a fintech you want to gain the trust of people, if just meeting the regulations is enough, to gain the trust, because like the banks are even the big banks are losing trust by the bank failures. So it's even harder probably for fintechs to gain the trust. And one of the things how to bake in the trust could be that you don't only consider the product features from the perspective of will the customers want to use it, will they want to pay for it, will it be buildable technically, will it bring the business outcomes, but think also like, is it ethical? Is this feature ethical? You know, like, should we in-depth this person that already has a debt? You know, is the sensible thing to do to offer another loan to this person? So like having this additional check, is it ethical? And trying to strive for having on top of regulatory standards, some ethical standards of your company. I think that could go a long way and show to your customers that you genuinely care about them and not see them as just revenue sources, right? That you want to exploit.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, so we can potentially slice this. I mean, there's a part here even around business continuity. If you're relying on one of these, there were even some of our clients that we worked with that were impacted by Wirecard, for example, and they, I think in all cases, had backup plans already in motion or ready to go to mitigate the risk. So that's also something to consider in this scenario. Like, when scandals happen, are you reliant on a third party? Are you reliant on a bank as a service? It's a very complicated business. And again, we've seen some of the failures that have happened either around us as we're building all these techs, or some of the sort of missteps that we took together with our clients trying to figure out, because often when you're building on the edge, you're building completely new things, you're figuring things out, regulators might not understand it. And I think this moves us nicely into the next question here, which I'm also not sure whether we're the perfect people to answer, but I'll ask it anyway. And it's a question from, interestingly, an anonymous participant asking about crypto. So have you worked with any crypto clients that needed help averting a crisis? Do you recall anything like this? Again, keeping everything confidential as we always do this session.
Yeah, but I don't think that it would be specifically us three having this experience, but I believe like this is a bread and butter of our colleagues who are doing the crypto audits, right? Like it's basically their job to avert any problems or irreversible problems in the smart contracts of
or actually prevention for those problems. Yes.
So I would say, yeah, like I regularly talk to the guys, and I think they never mentioned that they would see a contract where they were not able to find any vulnerabilities. So usually they find at least several ones, and the ways how the code could be exploited. So in this way, I think they can bring the trust back into the crypto and avert also big problems.
So the answer is not really to avert the crisis, but maybe even prevent it by doing thorough audits of the contracts. So they're working as designed.
Yes. So again, Vacuumlabs, crypto auditors, crypto smart contract auditors. That could be an option for you, Anonymous. But if you want sort of, if you feel that there might be a crisis brewing in some place where you're working or something that could be a crisis, feel free to reach out. I think, again, I can't speak for the colleagues that work in the crypto space or the blockchain space, but we're always called in when there's a need to potentially avert a crisis, whether that be from not delivering a product or something has happened like the FTX thing, which impacted a lot of businesses. And again, if you're interested in more, we'll definitely let you know. But there's always ways, and especially if you're working with smart contracts, the quickest way is to get it audited by a third party. It could be us, doesn't have to be us. It could be anybody you trust or believe in. Almost like this sort of prevention in this scenario can be very beneficial, and saving money to lose money is a great example of this, right?
Not lose money.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you don't want to lose money, so you don't want to save money in the
Spend money to save money.
Spend money to save money.
And this way you're also building the trust back in the fintech.
Yeah,
economy,
definitely.
right? By having your smart contracts out
We're bridging it together. Beautiful. All right, and I think the final question we have here is from Tuan. What is your ratio of failures to successes?
How do you measure success.
How do you measure failure?
How to measure failure. So
I don't think that the ratio is really important here, because when you're building a product, like there could be so many failures, but what counts is what at the end, you know, what's the end game? Like, did you deliver something tangible, usable that makes sense for customers? And I think in all, or I cannot remember the project that would be like a complete fail, that we didn't deliver anything, and there was no value to the client and customers at the end. Of course, you know that there are always hiccups along the way. I can recall.
it's not perfect.
Even if it's not perfect, it's done, right? When we are doing, for example, product discovery, each time you think you now have the solution that is right, you only talk to the customer next day just to find out that your solution is not worth much, and you are basically back to the ground zero. So you could consider this a failure, right? Because you were working on a solution that you then find out, okay, this is not the right one. So let's go again to drawing board and come up with a new solution. And you repeat this several times. Hoping that you learn more and are getting deeper into the problem, and also there is high likelihood that you have a better solution that you will come up with.
Well, from my perspective, again, just as Rudo said, that probably each project has a series small, we can call it failures, or things that we didn't set up perfect way, or in the right way. But it's the ability to do the retrospectives, to think about, are we doing it right, and are we ready to change constantly? That's then probably the success itself in motion, because you keep getting better and better, and in the end you deliver something meaningful. So
noticing failure is the first step towards making it a success.
Yeah.
So first need to find out what's wrong.
Yeah.
Fix it.
This also brings to mind, I always love the opportunity to quote Captain Jean-Luc Picard. One of the quotes from the TV show, The Next Generation, is, Mr. Data, sometimes you can make no mistakes and still fail. So really, we're all, in this world of technology and product building, which 40 years ago barely existed, 20 years ago was just getting started. We're all working on what they call the edge. We're literally sort of often using new technologies, not because they're new and have 5 developers, but because they're new. Like, there's people now starting to work with the new Apple Reality Pro. Vision Pro. I forgot. The Reality Pro was the.
Not a catchy title, right?
was the rumored title. So Vision Pro, and nobody has worked with anything like that other than people maybe working with Oculus but even the tech Apple has introduced is completely new. So the people who saw it 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, they're the first developers working with it, and they're learning. And there's going to be failures made, and even if you're trying to not make mistakes, you're still going to make them. So really, I think what's really important is what Rudo said is, are we getting to a point where we aren't stuck in a place from which we cannot move? And we can of course get into funding and when funding might run out for a business, but I think that's beyond this, because we could have a whole session on capitalization of businesses and how to fund and fund increase, because that's an obvious failure that has nothing to do with all the tech, all the product work, all the great product and project work. Is just it's a whole other dimension. So I think that's all the questions we have here. There aren't any more in neither the chat nor the Q&A. So at this point, I'd really like to thank all of you for joining us. Again, if you want to reach out, right now on the screen, you're seeing the contact information for Christina, Rudo, Juraj, and myself. And again, we encourage you, sign up for a free consultation if that's something you're interested in. And please let us know whether we're good, bad, or just done. For this session today, we'd like to thank you. Thank you, Kika. Thank you, Rudo. Thank you, Uri, and thank you to all the participants for joining us today.
And thank you, Marcel.
Yes.
Thank you, Marcel,
Thank
for doing
you,
a great
Marcel.
job and making this a fun experience for us. Yeah.